When it comes to anime and manga, one of the most popular genres has to be shonen, with the most famous publication for serializing the most recognizable ones being Shonen Jump. With having majorly popular series like One Piece, Hunter x Hunter, Chainsaw Man, and Jujutsu Kaisen. Now I love manga, as I have quite the collection and I love reading shonen manga. And with shonen manga being more readily available nowadays, thanks to the Shonen Jump and Manga Plus app, I get to keep up to date with these series in a more suitable format. Though of course, because you're given access to all these chapters and they're ongoing, I find myself running out of things to read. So in those instances, I turn to reading new material, with this being the new series that Shonen Jump publishes from time to time. However, I will say that there's a good and bad side to reading them. For one, you have new stuff to read, and you also get to be there at the beginning and see how the story develops in real time. Week by week, of course. Though, that's also the bad part about it. How the story develops. Some of these new series could start off with a bang with huge promises, while others strive for a more slow burner approach. And if readers don't enjoy that, or the series isn't pulling that much engagement, then it could inevitably lead to what people call the Shonen Jump Axe. Ah yes, the Shonen Jump Axe. Known within the manga community as being one of the most brutal things for a new series. Now people call it brutal because a new series can be 10 to 20 or more if they're lucky, chapters in, and then immediately get axed before the manga pulls all the stops. Which is unfortunate because whenever you read some of these axed mangas, you can see that it was going for a certain tone with its story. But that's sort of the downside of going with those types of stories on a platform that's mainly trying to target teens. Plus, there are some expectations being put onto these series as well, as they're trying to compete with, or at least stand alongside with, other major ongoing series like JJK and One Piece. But to cut out the fat and get into the meat and potatoes of this video, today, I want to talk about some of these Shonen Jump series that I feel like got axed too early, and what I feel like has some potential. Now, these are going to be some fairly old series that I want to talk about, but they're ones that I can't get off my mind. Mainly due to me constantly having this video idea in the back of my mind. The 4 shonen mangas I'll be talking about today are Doron Dororon, Aliens Area, Ayashimon, and PPPPPP. Now the way I'm going to go about this is by talking about the plot of each manga, and also describing my likes and dislikes of them, while also trying to dissect the reasoning as to why they got cancelled in the first place. So again, let's get right into it, starting with Doron Dororon. Welcome back, Demon Slayer. So yeah, if you aren't able to tell from its cover art, this is a demon exorcism manga where they use katanas. You can probably guess where they got their inspiration from. I hate to call it a Demon Slayer clone, but if you were to read this after reading Demon Slayer, then it's hard to not see some parallels. You have the demon sidekick who's unlike the other demons, which makes them lovable and marketable. You have the organization that slays these demons. The main character's mother was killed by a demon, and their goal is to vanquish all the demons to save the world. Okay, those last two are forgiving as they're just story beats, but although it does have these similarities, I feel like it had enough differences to make it stand out at least a bit. It decides to go for the My Hero route where the protagonist isn't fit to use the magic system of this world, so instead he uses the demon or Mononoke that he befriends as a weapon. Oh yeah, I should probably give some more background to this manga and its mangaka. Doron Dororon was created by Gen Osaka, and unsurprisingly, they did have other works under the belt as well, more so one-shots than series. Well, he did actually have another series before Doron Dororon called Golem Hearts, though it too didn't last long with it only having 15 chapters. To get a better idea of his writing style and the improvements he's made, I decided to read that short-lived series as well as the first one-shot he's written, Go Strong. He has written another one-shot before Doron Dororon called Fantasies, however, I wasn't able to find anything on it. I could only find a Reddit thread of someone asking if there's a translated scan of it, but that's about it. So sadly, I won't be able to read it, but the other two should suffice. But after reading them, they felt sort of generic in my eyes. The first one-shot is about a ghost who wants to fight evil spirits to get stronger, and the protagonist for it doesn't really leave much of an impression, and it ends with him saving a village from an evil spirit, with a fake out where the village girl he rescued earlier thinks he's going to kill the villagers because he makes it seem like they're already dead, but then he just cuts their spirits free from the possession of the evil spirit. Nothing really noteworthy of it. Now for Golem Hearts, although the premise is interesting with the protagonist being a humanoid golem who wants to be the second best Arcanist, and also second best because he wants his father to be the best Arcanist. Now again, the premise and the world itself seem interesting from the little I got, and I feel like if the mangaka dug a bit more, then it possibly could have been more interesting, but it kind of suffers from the same thing. The protagonist is kinda a bit bland and a bit too happy-go-lucky for me, and heck, one of the side characters are put in the sidelines during the test arc because he got stabbed for the protag's negligence. And as for the side characters, they aren't better in any way, they're just bland as well. The female side character, who I can't remember her name, she's written to be the anxiety-filled weak shonen girl. Then the protag's rival on the other hand, he's better. I just see him as a Sasuke, which he kinda is supposed to be, going with the shonen trio friend group trope. But as for the story, it goes at a pretty fast pace, which makes me think that the mangaka knew that they had to get to the interesting parts to entice readers to keep reading. When it does get to a semi-decently interesting part, for me being where the golems can be corrupted, it quickly moves over to the final villain who was introduced early in the story, then ending with a war that just immediately gets resolved. It's kind of shit. So reading those two pieces and realizing that they're kind of mediocre, I think it's time to get into Doron Dororon and see if the mangaka has improved quite a bit. So let's get started by talking about its premise. It takes place in what seems like modern Japan, however in this world inhabit evil spirits called Mononoke, who terrorize the world. And to combat them, there's an organization of samurais called the Izanagi Force that help the people of Japan by eliminating these Mononoke. Now for our protag, Dora Sasaki, he wants to join the Izanagi Force because he made a promise to his dead mother, who was killed by a Mononoke, that he'd become one. Though when he's old enough to take the test, he immediately fails because he doesn't have the potential to use any supernatural energy. But that doesn't stop him as he eventually meets a friendly Mononoke called Kusanagi, who also wants to put a stop to all the evil Mononoke. So he works together with Dora, not that Dora, by being able to turn into a sword to defeat all the evil Mononoke while also joining the organization. Now, if this is your first read, then you might think that this is a pretty interesting concept, which it can be. However, if you read a good amount of manga, especially within the last 7 years, then there's probably a thought that might have popped into your head, which is, oh, this is just Demon Slayer, but not Demon Slayer. Which, yes, that thought did also cross my mind, but I didn't want to write the series off just because of that. I mean, it's easy to label other stories as just a rehash of another story, as, of course, people are going to take inspiration from somewhere. So usually I like to at least give something a try to see if it at least gives something different. But I will say for Doron Dororon's case, it's hard to not see it as a Demon Slayer replacement, as shown with the joke from earlier, as this series came out a year after Demon Slayer ended. If I had to make a film theory here, I would say that Jump probably published this as a way to see if it could garner the same amount of interest as Demon Slayer, or at least fill in the hole that Demon Slayer left. But since I'm making this video and you probably never heard of this manga, then you know that it didn't do that. Okay, I think I should go more in detail about what I like and don't like about this manga. I do think the protagonist is at least interesting, as while he isn't much of the cookie-cutter goody-two-shoes like Tanjiro, yes, I'm going to continue with the comparisons, but having Dora be the punk with a heart and Kusanagi being a gullible and caring creature is a good duo to have, and the story does good at keeping that dynamic. Now after the first 2 chapters where we see Dora and Kusanagi teaming up, we then get introduced to the first of many side characters that we'll meet in this short series. That character is Ginchio, who is a samurai cadet, meaning that while she is strong, she isn't the strongest within the organization. She's kind of meant to be the first character that we kind of see how strong some of the samurais are, and also get Dora into the organization since he isn't able to with the lack of supernatural powers and the fact that he's teaming up with a Mononoke. Now I kinda do like her, as she has a smug personality, and as for her character arc, it revolves around her wanting to get stronger, and it kinda gets more shown in the arc where Dora and her fight a powerful Mononoke, the one that killed Dora's mother. Now, I briefly want to talk about this arc as it introduces two new things to the reader. One of them being a new character from the Izanagi Force, that being Heisuke, who I think is fine, but he's also a bit of a flag character with him just wanting to be praised by everyone. Oh, and that's par for the course, as every character for the most part is pretty one-dimensional, or doesn't have something to make them stand out. At least in my eyes. But granted, that's because the series didn't last long, so for all I know, it would have been like Demon Slayer where there'd be big arcs in the Hashira stand-ins from this manga, which, yes, there are, will be explored. But yeah, Heisuke's meant to be one of these Hashira stand-ins, as he's the strongest one of them all, and needs to be Ginshio's replacement as Dora's teacher as she goes off to train to become stronger. And he isn't even like a good teacher, as he kinda does nothing for the most part, but I'll save that after we get through this part. Now for the other new thing that gets introduced are the actual enemies that Dora and the Izanagi Force have to face, the humanoid Mononoke. Now the way that the mangaka introduces this new type of Mononoke, I think it's done well, as after Dora gets his revenge on the Mononoke that killed his mother, this humanoid Mononoke bursts out of its body. I just want to comment on how many times I just said Mononoke there. Jesus. Anyways, it then shows its strength by shooting out a blast that presumably kills hundreds of people, but it manages to escape thanks to another humanoid Mononoke that yanks them out of there. I should also mention that all of this happens and we're still like within 10 chapters, which I feel like is extremely fast. I don't know if it's because the mangaka wanted to introduce these baddies as early as they can, or if they needed to as a way to keep readers reading. I sort of feel like it's the latter because as you continue reading, they keep introducing more and more characters and scenarios, and it all just comes off as them trying to desperately keep readers engaged. After this event, Dora and Kusanagi both get accepted into the Izanagi Force and are then trained by Heisuke, which then introduces Dora's rival, who doesn't have that many rivalry moments with each other because, yeah, the story isn't long. Going back for a bit about how Heisuke doesn't teach Dora anything, well, they have a bit of a training arc, if you can call it that, as Heisuke has a sparring match with Dora to see where they're at in terms of the fundamentals, to which after pulling a bit of a fraud hawk and scratching Dora, Heisuke essentially tells them to just get better by finding a way to defend themselves from supernatural energy, since they don't have a way to block it without having supernatural energy. He just leaves it to him to figure it out on his own with no hit or anything, and it's only until Dora meets his rival and him explaining the use of supernatural energy for something other than attacking that Dora is able to figure it out. Well, more so Kusanagi, as he's the one that tries extending his supernatural energy to Dora to essentially protect him. After they're done with that, the next thing that happens in the manga is that they attack the spot where the humanoid Mononoke are hiding. Because they were being sloppy, or I guess intentional, as they're trying to shorten the amount of strong samurais. We also get introduced to a new character who will be important, but not really by the end. But it's weird how this arc is set up, because the villains feel like they're made to be overall important to the story, like they're to be the high-ranking Mononoke, similar to the high-ranking demons from Demon Slayer, but they're not. As by the end, they're all easily beaten. Rest in peace to the cute one. It's just a weird direction to take with them, as I feel like it was trying to imply that while yes, there are some strong, monstrous Mononoke, but as for the humanoid ones, they're meant to be more intelligent and are to be more frightened. But nope. They're just belittled by the end of the arc. So it kinda just begs to ask, why set them up? Again, I think this is another example where the mangaka did want to explore more with this idea, but because of the steadily declining readers, they were made to abandon the idea. Which sucks, as it could have led to possibly interesting plot threads where, because they're roughly similar to humans, they could have blended in with society with no one realizing. A simple idea of an example, but you get the idea. But even though that happens to them, one of them does kind of survive, though it's meant to be implied that it's a copy of them, and they're the ones who's like the main bad guy or something. Other than that reveal, it's also shown that there's a traitor within the Izanagi Force who's working for that Mononoke. We then get introduced to a new Hashira, again, not stopping with the comparisons, who I also think is okay, but they just sort of remind me of the mangaka's other female characters, which just makes me believe that he just doesn't have that large of a pool of variety when it comes to character personalities. At least when it comes to the female characters. Anyways, her name is Naotora, and she's in love with Dora for reasons, and Kusanagi realizes and is on her side when it comes to the ship. Amazing. But yeah, after all that, the story begins to show its decline as you can just get a sense that the mangaka is throwing anything at the wall, hoping for it to stick to attract readers, but for it to only go nowhere. As we get a glimpse of Kusanagi's past, and then after that arc, we get to the final war arc, where we get revealed as to who the traitor is, and of course, it's a letdown of a reveal. It turns out to be someone from a previous arc, which I feel like that decision was made at last second, as it was set up to be a huge thing, but again, low readership, quick to be on the cutting room. I say the reveal of it to be a letdown is because they resolved the issue in the most boring way, where instead of there being huge stakes, they immediately, and with no issue at all, kill the Mononoke possessing the samurai. Then we see the Hashiros fight the strong Mononoke, with them being taken care of easily, and see the return of Ginshio, so that's cool I guess. We also see why she wants to get stronger, and even though we're shown that, she doesn't get a single kill, and she never will. Oh well. Then, for the finale, the main villain overpowers all of the Izanagi samurais, including the strong leader of the organization. Then he does some cookie-cutter villain stuff where he absorbs his subordinate, and he gets super buffed. But of course, Kusanagi and Dora use their power of friendship to overpower his strength and defeat him with one shot. All of the Mononoke vanish, including Kusanagi. Dora and all the Izanagi force are essentially out of a job, which means the unemployment rate will see a huge spike upwards, and the story ends. Wow, what a story. Okay, if I have to give some credit, the beginning of it did seem promising and it had a bit of momentum going for it. But as soon as the story gets to Dora facing his mother's killer and then revealing to what seemed to be the bigger threat, you can just feel the story slowly losing its focus. As the mangaka tries to go through certain parts of the story quickly while also throwing things at the wall in hopes of something sticking. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record for saying this, but it honestly feels true. But all in an attempt to keep readers engaged. I mean, sure, it is possible to have a quickly paced story. I mean, that's sort of what some modern shonen mangas are doing. Some examples that do this well are Chainsaw Man, Sakamoto Days, Undead Unluck, and Danadan, so it is possible. But it isn't just lack of ideas or how it was paced that makes it fall short, but it's also the lack of originality. I mean, there were so many comparisons to make with Demon Slayer that there was little to see the originality in it. It also just doesn't help that it all just felt mediocre. But even with all that, I'd still like to see what Otsuka will come up with next. With all the flops they've had, I'm sure they'd be able to apply what they've learned so they'd be able to make something decent. But for now, I gotta say, Doron Dororon is my least favorite out of the ones I'll be talking about today. This next manga I'll be talking about is a bit shorter than Doron Dororon, but I did like what could have been with this manga. That being Alien's Area by Fusai Naba. One thing that'll probably stand out when reading this is the art style, and it's interesting to say the least. Well, at least for myself, as I know I found myself not liking it at first, as it feels like there's just something off about it, like with the character proportions. But when I came back to reread it, I found myself kind of liking it. But as for the background for Naba, this is their first serialization, as up till then, they've only made one-shots. I did try to see if there were any translations for them, but the only one I was able to find was for the one-shot Apollo. I'll try not to spend too much time on it, but to boil down what this one-shot is about, think of Ghostbusters, but very anime-fied. That's pretty much what I can sum it up as. Because it is a one-shot and it has 50 pages to tell a story, it tries to cram a fair bit in with introducing its world and concepts, as well as the characters. But because it does try to do all that, nothing of note really left an impression on me aside from the art style and character designs. Though I guess I gotta say that the second male lead in that one-shot sort of does remind me of the second male lead in Alien's Area, so I guess there's that. But as I mentioned earlier, with this one-shot being the only one of Namba's one-shots being translated, it's hard to say how much they improved, so let's not fret over it too much and get into their first serialization. Alien's Area takes place in Japan, where we follow our protagonist Tatsumi Tatsunami, who after graduating high school, decides to work more part-time jobs. He does this so he could provide for his younger brother and sister, as both his parents died in an accident when he was young. Though one day his arm begins acting strange as it's able to heal any injuries he gets on that arm. He does go for a checkup only to find nothing wrong with them, but as he's leaving, he's stopped by someone who wants to question him about the incident when his parents died. Though he ignores them and heads home where he finds someone waiting outside of his apartment. And this is where the manga shows one of its potential strengths, as when he enters his apartment, someone is standing there waiting for him. It's soon revealed that these people are actually aliens, and they want to take the implant that's inside of Tatsumi's arm. But the way the aliens are introduced and how we get these close-up panels of the aliens gives some horror-esque elements, which is something you think will be incorporated in future chapters or arcs where our protagonists will have to fight these monstrous aliens and there'll be some horror placed in. At least something reminiscent of John Carpenter's The Thing or Ridley Scott's Alien. But the further you read, nothing similar is shown in this manner. Anyways, Tatsumi's younger siblings then come in and are used as hostages for him to give up his implants. But being desperate to save his siblings, he then reaches out his arm to save them, and his implanted arm then stretches out and launches the aliens away. Okay, seeing his attack, you're probably thinking it, and I thought the same thing when I first read this chapter when it came out. This is just Luffy's gum fruit ability with constant hockey. Now this is just a film theory, but I feel like the mangaka or their editor probably caught on to this because Tatsumi doesn't use this ever again in the next 20 chapters. Anyways, as he's about to get Jiji no Ri, the cop from earlier shows up and saves him. He introduces himself and then reveals the existence of a secret government organization that handles aliens affairs called Foreign Affairs 5, as Earth is labeled as an aliens area where aliens see it as a place to do shady stuff. Seeing that Tatsumi has an implant, Sharaku, the cop, gives him the opportunity to work alongside him, which he accepts for that government pay and the safety of his siblings. Then the next few chapters have us following the both of them as Tatsumi and us, the readers, get introduced to this secret side of society, as well as getting shown how fights will work in this manga, with the humans using alien tech. One that gets shown to us is Shiraku using what they call equipment that affects his gravity to have better movement. This idea at first seems cool, as you can probably imagine some of the ways it can be used, as well as wondering what other sorts of equipment not only the agency will have, but what technology the aliens have. Though those ideas get short-lived as we don't get shown much of the equipment that they can use, but that's just because of how short the manga is. For the equipment that Foreign Affairs have, we only get shown a basic laser gun, a laser sword, and some eye contacts that pretty much act like the SS materia from Final Fantasy VII. You could probably tell I played Final Fantasy VII Rebirth recently. So it's kinda sad that we don't get to see much of not only the equipment, but the alien tech as well, as I feel like it could've gotten pretty nutty. Especially when you consider that there are also implants that could potentially be used alongside with the equipment. I don't know, just spitballing some ideas. Anyways, we're also introduced to Sharaku's squad, who were meant to be the side characters that we are meant to love, but they don't get shown that much because, again, short manga. After their introduction, nothing much of note really happens, so I'll just skip to the final 10 chapters where the most interesting part of the manga happens. Basically, we learn that there's this other organization that essentially hates aliens and does whatever to eliminate them called A3, but the group that our party is in and the whole agency itself do nothing about them. As later we find out when they did try to do something about it, it didn't end well. Anyways, Shiraku and Tatsumi both follow these aliens, who aren't being conspicuous, to a bar where we get introduced to this lady who used to be a part of that bad group, but she left because she fell in love with someone and now helps aliens who come to Earth illegally. Shiraku and her play a bit of mind games as to whether or not to turn her in, but with Tatsumi there not wanting her to be taken in, they decide to leave her be. Though as they leave, someone walks past them and enters the bar, only for an explosion to go off. They go back to check up on the lady, only to find that not only are her and the aliens dead, but also that there's a man sitting in the flames. Okay, I gotta say, this whole sequence of events went kinda hard in my opinion. I thought this was a cool way to set up and introduce the antagonist for this arc, which is the evil group A3. Tatsumi does try to stop him, but gets stopped by Sharaku, as her highest priority is to stop civilians from interfering and finding out that there's aliens. I did find this part to be sort of an interesting thing that they could explore, as with there being lines that they aren't able to cross, it could set up potential scenarios where the organization has inner conflict, which leads to what happens next in the story. To be able to go after A3, they hold a meeting with the other sectors of foreign affairs. But this isn't played as a regular meeting, as half of them do want to go after A3 since they've been getting out of hand. But the other half don't want to, because the last time they tried to, resulted in a lot of them dying for nothing. So it becomes a bit of a battle of politics, and I kinda enjoyed it. We get more of Sharaku's past, as well as the truth behind Tatsumi's parents' death, and why he got the implants. Though, I'm just gonna move through all of that and jump straight to the final battle. That's because all of this gets resolved really fast, as the mangaka is left with like 3 or 4 chapters to wrap everything up. The fights are nothing to note, but the antagonist was at least kind of interesting, as we learned that A3 manipulates people into joining their group by orchestrating events where they make people have a visceral hate against aliens. This too happened with our antagonist, which I don't know why they would reveal that to him, but hey, what do I know? I'm just a degenerate that loves Nia. But learning of this truth made him want to seek revenge against A3, so he plans to destroy their headquarters along with himself. But that doesn't happen, as Sharaku saves him and everyone in the vicinity, thus resolving the issue and ending the manga. I did find this manga to have some promising ideas, but the way it went around telling its story wasn't very Shonen Jump, to say the least. Not that it couldn't work, as not everything in Jump is a battle shonen, like Akane Banashi, but Alien's Area did sort of present itself as a battle shonen. But it did take its time trying to introduce everything to us in a slow pace, and it also took its slow pace approach by trying to have these character moments. It all felt sort of slice of life-ish, with the battles and alien stuff kind of being in the background. Then when it did try to go for these battles or alien-related stuff, it went from either a Monster of the Week sort of vibe or mundane police check stuff. Which I think is what made it not so popular with readers, as it didn't have that huge hook. I'll give it credit and say it felt more original than Doron Dororon, with, again, more promising ideas, but it lacked the building up to something big that I felt it had the potential to, as the elements were there. With A3 being more of a looming threat, that or the aliens, with Earth being an area for aliens to gather to do shady stuff, then the combative situations that implants and alien tech presents. So, there's things that could have been explored, so it just sucks that it wasn't able to fulfill those ideas. But even aside from that, if it did try to focus on the characters more, I don't think it still wouldn't have done well, at least with how the characters are presented in these few chapters. They don't really stick out as much, with Sharaku being the only interesting character, even more so than the protagonist himself, which is kind of a bad thing to have. Of course, there are stories where the side characters are more interesting than the protagonists themselves. One that comes to mind being My Hero. I find Todoroki and Bakugo being more interesting characters than Deku, but even then, Deku has at least something where you won't completely not care for him, and he also has his moments, unlike Tatsumi, which he didn't even have some. Though when it comes to Naba, thankfully he isn't done with getting back into the ring, because as I'm writing this, it was announced that he's coming back with another series, and as I'm recording this right now, that series has a few chapters out, and it's okay. Though we'll just have to see if it'll last longer than Alien's Area, or if it'll become a huge success. That part, I don't know. Editing me will probably put something if something changes. So, to sort of end off this section, there's one last comment I would like to make about Alien's Area. And that's the volume covers. For some fucking reason, they went really hard. Now this next manga actually comes from an established mangaka, as they've already had a well-received series that also had an anime adaptation. That of course being Yuji Kaku, or as you may know them as, the mangaka who created Hell's Paradise. Shocker, I know, as you wouldn't think that someone who made a hit series would get their next series axed from Jump, but it's not that uncommon, as Kishimoto, creator of Naruto, got his other series that he created after it, called Samurai 8, axed. There's probably other examples of it, but that's one that I know of. I'll of course get into the reason as to why I think this new series didn't do well, but before I get to that and the synopsis of it, there's one little tidbit that I like to mention before getting right to it. You might know this if you're into the manga/anime sphere, but before Hell's Paradise, Yuji used to be Tatsuki Fujimoto's assistant, who, if you somehow don't know who he is, then you'll know him as the creator of Chainsaw Man, Fire Punch, and the one-shot that's going to become a movie, Look Back. Which, being the assistant of an established mangaka might not mean a whole lot, as you don't really hear other mangakas' assistants getting popular series that often, but for Fujimoto's case, that seems to be different. I might be exaggerating a bit with this, but so far, every one of his assistants who've gotten a serialization has gone on to become popular. There's of course Yuji with Hell's Paradise, Yukinobu Tatsu with Danadan, Tatsuya Endo with Spy Family. I didn't even know he was his assistant. And while this one is unsure for now, but another one of his assistants, Toru Koromori, has started a series called Centura. It really makes me wonder what sort of knowledge he shares with them. Anyways, with that tangent out of the way, to get right back on track, it's time to share what the plot of Ayashimon is. So we follow this kid named Maruo, who trained himself to be super strong, sort of like Saitama from One Punch Man, where he's so strong that no normal person is a challenge to him anymore. The reason why he wants to become so strong is so that he could become a shonen protagonist, like his favorite Shonen Jump protags, Jotaro and Goku. Though it's shown that there's more to it, as he grew up with an abusive father, so he wanted to get strong enough to defeat the final villain, as he puts it. But because he beat him so easily, he's gone out to fill in that void by trying to become a shonen protag. But seeing his goal being unattainable, he tries looking for a job, but fails at doing so because of his strength. That is until he encounters a girl named Urara, who is being chased by a group of thugs that end up being the Yakuza. But they aren't normal Yakuza, as they're Ayashimon. Which, after doing a simple Google search, Ayashimon are yokais that take on the form of a human because of money. And if you don't know what a yokai is, watch my Yokai Watch video or something, I don't know. Anyways, Maruo at first declines the girl into joining her family, her Yakuza one, since she was the daughter of the leader of a huge Yakuza clan, was because her father passed away due to unknown reasons, and the big families within the clan disbanded into 4 large groups that are in a power struggle to take over the old clan. If you play the Yakuza games, then you sort of get it. But one of the big families is after Urara to kill her so that her family's existence will be gone. Though Maruo doesn't want anything to do with the Yakuza, since he doesn't like the way they operate. But his opinion is swayed when he learns that he can have these manga-level fights with the Ayashimons. So in the end, he joins her family, and they plan to destroy her father's clan while rebuilding it into something new, as well as getting revenge on the person who killed their father. So I personally found the concept to be interesting, as being a huge fan of the Yakuza games, I like me some Yakuza stories. With that being the concept, and with some yokai elements being added, I liked this manga when it first released. Rereading it though, at first it was a bit of a slog. Could be because this would be the 3rd time I would be rereading the first few chapters. Well, that and the beginning doesn't really leave that much of an impact. I'm kinda at a loss for words here, so okay, I'll talk about what I liked and didn't like for the beginning, or at least in the first volume. Maruo as a protagonist doesn't really stand out as much, and later when the manga ends, the mangaka sort of recognizes that, I guess. I'll talk about that for later. But Maruo is presented as this dumb, strong kid who wants to fight stronger people, which does sort of describe other Jump characters like Goku, Saitama, Luffy kinda, and plenty more. But what makes him different from Maruo is that their personalities aren't as dull. I mean, he does have the manga fanatic side of him, which should make him unique, but if his character is just him wanting to be like other manga protagonists, then it doesn't feel like there's much of him as an individual. That does sort of change by the end, but that's the thing. It happens at the end. Aside from Maruo himself, which I do think is the main complaint, I do think the story itself was going in an interesting direction. There were moments in my head where I go, oh, that's cool, while also thinking, man, that's like Yakuza, in a good way. In all honesty, I do think the story would have gone in the direction of Yakuza 2, if I'm remembering things right, due to the hints it plays. But this is just me guessing from what little was released. The main antagonist that it sets up, being Dopo, who took over the Enma Syndicate, is revealed to have been a lackey who was timid and weak until suddenly becoming this strong individual who's not to be trifled with when taking over the Enma Syndicate. And I gotta say, the mangaka does set him up really well, as we see him do morbid things, such as torturing other Ayashimon by sculpting them into works of art in his eyes, placing fears into others. Then there's a moment where he finds the cast and puts them in their place by nearly killing them. So we kinda get to see this overall difference in not only strength, but how deep his connections run, as we're told how he's buddy-buddy with the mayor. Not only that, but also having connections with Ayashimon investigators that deal with Ayashimon affairs. They're sort of introduced as this threatening police force that'll probably interfere with the main cast with their Yakuza business. Also, it probably would have ended with them having some ties to Doppo's rise to power, but we'll never know. Then we also get a montage of Doppo asserting his position in Kabukicho by eliminating all of his competition, and I really like this sequence, as again, it shows his strength in the Yakuza world. But after all that happens, we follow Maruo and the gang as they start trying to recruit the families that used to be under the Enma Syndicate. Which is cool, but by the end of the story, they're only able to recruit one of them. Now the rest of the manga, personally, isn't worth talking about much. I would advise reading it if interested, but I do want to talk about the last few chapters, but one specifically. So in this final arc, Maruo is fighting the leader, or I guess second in command of this previous Enma Syndicate group, but he nearly dies, and the second to last chapter starts with what seems like a fourth wall break. As we're in this mangaka's office as he's drawing the next chapter of Ayashimon. It's kinda weird at first until it's revealed to be that it's all in Maruo's head as he's nearly dying. Though that's not important. What stands out to me are the comments about Maruo as a protagonist. I do kind of wonder if those were the type of comments people were actually making when this manga was releasing, and if that's what led to this manga being axed. It wouldn't surprise me if that was part of it, and I guess the first couple of chapters not being interesting at all probably didn't help. But even with all that, I do and did see the potential of what this manga could have been. It probably wouldn't have had these high-octane fights like the other series that it was competing with, but it could have been something new and slightly different within the Jump library. However, the mangaka decided to take the slow burn approach to telling the story, and it sadly didn't work out for them. Now, this has become another example of a mangaka having written a popular series not catching lightning in the bottle again. But, as I have been saying, I'm interested in seeing what they have cooking up next. Now it's time for the final manga to have gotten axed. I saved this one for last for a reason. It's kind of the anomaly out of the ones I talked about in this video, as this manga lasted for 70 chapters. The title for this manga is PPPPPP, and it's created by the mangaka Mapalo 3. Already off to an interesting start. Another thing that's different about this manga compared to the other ones I talked about is that it's not a battle shonen, but a music manga. Now, I will admit here and now that when it comes to music, I'm musically challenged. What I mean by that is I don't really listen to what people would call actual music. I mean, it's still music, but it's not music that most mainstream audiences will listen to. The music I would normally listen to are video game OSTs or, as of recently, anime music. My music library is atrocious. So if music isn't one of my strongest suits, why did I give this manga that's not just about music, but classical piano music, a shot? Well, I cannot tell you in the slightest, but it did keep me engaged even if I barely understood some of what they were talking about. Listen, you gotta at least read something more than just another battle shonen, you know? But what really matters is, did I enjoy reading this manga all the way through? Well, the answer to that is... I have no idea. Again, the concept of what they're talking about goes way over my head, and the music that they play requires you to know what they're playing, or to at least have it playing in the background while reading it. Then there's the art style and the character designs, which are unique, to put it plainly, but even then, not in a bad way. But even with how they're drawn, some of the visuals that the mangaka illustrates to sort of bring the music that they're playing to life are so eye-catching. But with how much the stuff they talk about goes over my head, I would find myself to stop reading it, only to then pick it back up, because of how much it would leave an impression on my mind. And then on its final arc, it just left me pondering about it for days with how it ended, just wanting to read more of it. Okay, I think I went on a bit long with that, but this manga is just interesting to say the least. All the while, I'm unable to figure out if I actually enjoyed Mappalu's 3 work, which is weird to say. But to get into their work history, they've made 3 one-shots before PPPPPP, one of which is sort of a prequel or at least follows a character that appears in this manga, that one-shot being Dun-Dun-Dun-Dun. Not Dun-Dun-Dun, but Dun-Dun-Dun-Dun, which if you read PPPPPP, then you know it's named after the notes in the beginning of Beethoven's Symphony No. 5. Also, I just realized, I just kind of did the meme where a kid will hear a song and say, oh, it's from Fortnite or from TikTok when it existed before TikTok or Fortnite. I'm ashamed of myself. But to get back on topic, I will go into this one shot as it's also rehashed in the main manga, with the only difference being that the one shot goes more into detail. Although it's not required to read this one shot before starting PPPPPP, I'd still recommend it since it gives a bit more characterization for these characters, even if, again, it's rehashed. So putting the one shot aside, what is PPPPPP about? Well, before I get into that, I guess I should explain what the hell that title is. So, to flex some of my musical knowledge, meaning what I was able to learn from doing some Google searches, the P's are meant to be the way the notes are played, with the P's being how quiet or softly it is played. This is what's called pianissimo, represented with 2 P's, but as you can tell, there are 6 of them. So for this instance, it would probably be pianissimo, though there is a version of it with 3 P's called pianissimo, so it could be something different. However, the manga calls what the protagonist plays the one with the 3 E's, so we'll go with that. Okay, now for the premise itself. It's about a family of septuplets. Yes, 7 twins. Goddamn, her mother must be that octopus mom. But every one of them is a genius at playing the piano. However, our protagonist, Lucky, isn't. He's mediocre at it, and because of that, he was abused by his father, which led to his mother getting a divorce and taking only Lucky with her. So while his brothers and sister went off to become famous for their piano playing, he was stuck in a Cinderella situation as his mother became sick. But even though he's mediocre at the piano, he continues playing for his mother until he's pushed by her to pursue his dreams of reuniting with his other siblings to play the piano together once again. Simple premise, but other than that, the way the manga structures each arc is akin to most battle shonens, where we get introduced to the main villain group, those being the twins, and each arc revolves around one of them until they get to the final one, who would have presumably been the dad, I guess. But of course, instead of battling it out with their fists, they have piano competitions. The villains that Lucky has to face are, as I mentioned, his brothers and sister, as they're sent to Japan by their father to win every competition so that no one other than geniuses like themselves can only play the piano. Now with that setup, you would think that it would fall into that repetitiveness that formats like this typically get, which it kinda does for 2 major arcs. I only say that because they're both set up similarly and they end similarly, but there is of course depth to them that makes them stand out, as each sibling that Lucky goes against are meant to be foils of Lucky himself. Like the first sibling he goes against, Reijiro, grew up isolated with little to no friends, until he did make a friend, only for that friend to despise Reijiro for losing on purpose against him, and ever since then he's been alone. Lucky, on the other hand, was able to make friends and meet people who eventually cared about him. So to win him over, Lucky uses his piano playing to grant Reijiro's wish by creating a musical world where he's not alone anymore. Having the siblings written out like this is pretty nice, as Lucky is made to understand his siblings better to evoke these feelings out of his piano playing to help them. So kinda like Talk no Jutsu, but not. Now when the piano playing starts, that's where the manga could lose you if you don't know what the music they're playing sounds like. The mangaka does try to convey what the music sounds like by having the characters analyze what the theme of the music is and what feelings it tries to capture. Not only that, but they then try to further convey it by bringing the music to life by depicting what the characters are seeing with the music they're listening to. This is where the magic of this manga shines, as we get these imaginative illustrations that are out of this world at times, and it sort of gives deeper insight to the characters that are creating these musical worlds. All of these work well, to an extent. You would still need to listen to the song beforehand or while reading to fully convey the feelings, and I think because of that, it's probably what lost readers' interest. Everything else about the manga I thought was really nice, like the art style. Even with how hectic it can get with the designs, they still look nice. I personally like the characters and how they're written, especially lucky when it comes near towards the end, as the mangaka ends it in a very non-shonen way. And that's all I'm gonna say, because this is one of those mangas where even though it got axed, it's still worth reading. But as much as I like everything else, I would say that with the music being one of the main focal points, it could definitely go over the reader's head. I know it did for me when I was reading it weekly. But it really saddens me that it got cancelled, and I've always wondered why, as it was able to last for a good amount of time. I've seen people theorize that because it was competing with Akane Banashi, as they're both non-battle shonens that cover a specific topic, PPPPP lost to it due to Akane becoming the more popular series, so that sucks. If any way true that is. Though it's not over for Mapalo 3, as they've been working on another series that started late last year called Magical Girl Tsubame, I Will Not Save the World. From the title, you could probably get an inkling as to what it's about, as well as guess that it takes the Madoka route, which it kinda does. I like what I've read so far, and Mapalo 3's style continues to shine in this series as well. I know this section was kinda all over the place, which sorry about that, but I just find it hard to talk about PPPPP. What I can say is that after rereading it, I did find myself enjoying it once again, and I really do like it. And I really wish there was more, especially with how it ended. So if there's definitely one manga in this list that I would recommend checking out, then it would definitely be this one. And those are all the axed shonen mangas that I wanted to talk about. I found it kind of fun going back and rereading these, even though there were a few times where I did find it to be a drag, but I do somewhat believe it's worth reading these series that get axed, as from it, you can learn exactly what makes a good manga from a mediocre one. Because even though there are some currently running mangas that seem, or at least people call mid, there is a reason why they're still continuing compared to some of these axed ones. Except for Rent Your Girlfriend, I don't know how that piece of shit is still running. But by seeing what's been cancelled or what stays, you can see the trends that readers love reading. As with Doron Dororon, we can see that it at least had some influence from Demon Slayer, and it probably tried to ride that wave of popularity it was having from the anime. But what made it flop was probably due to having those close similarities to Demon Slayer, as well as not having the ingredients that made people love Demon Slayer. Though that's just what I think. My film theory, you can say. No. So overall, while you might consider it a waste of time to read these newly fresh series, as they could just easily end up being axed, I do find it to be worth your time to read the new stuff. There is always going to be a diamond in the rough in the new releases that's worth finding. Plus, if you do find one that does last long and gets popular, then you could be one of those pretentious fucks that brags about being there day one. And doesn't that make it worth it? Cause I sure as hell was there for Kagurabachi.